everybody. Welcome to Dungeon of Deadly Delights. I'm, of course, Rob DiLauro, and with me, as always, is Miss Holly Interlandi. Holly, what is going on?
Cheers.
So this is our final episode of the year. We are taking a little bit of a break here.
Much needed hiatus.
I feel like I need it, especially after over 40 episodes. So yeah. We don't want to get deeply into world stuff or whatever. Obviously, we hope that everybody's safe and out of harm's way. When it comes to COVID or even financial stress and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that hopefully shows like ours can kind of be a beacon for you guys to break away from that for a minute. And I think we've got another great show. But the proof is in the pudding, I guess. You know what I mean? Like
good topic.
The audience.
I'm stoked.
So yeah, as we said, it is our final show of the year. Did want to announce that when we come back in January 2021, which is we're actually going to be doing a best of 20. What's that?
No, it still sounds like futuristic robot year.
Yeah, it does. Totally does. We're going to be doing a best of 2021 episode, which is probably going to be about 10 minutes long.
Yeah, I have a whole list of. I was like, when I realized we were doing that, I was like, oh shit, I gotta go back and like watch movies that were actually released this year.
Yeah.
And I'd actually, I mean, they're a good amount that I think I could add. So that'll be my homework.
I already have my front runners. For the most part. I mean, obviously there wasn't a lot of horror films or films in general that came out this year. There were a few that really just really stoked my fancy. I definitely, I have a pretty solid idea of what my favorite horror film of the year is. But again, maybe something else comes out like in the last month, who knows? But I think even though it's going to be a short list, I think there was, things worthy enough to talk about within. Like Freaky with Vince Vaughn which was so much fun to watch.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Oh my God, It's fantastic. So as you guys can see, I was actually really happy by the positive feedback that it received, because I've heard, my entire life, what a trashy movie it is, but happy anniversary, David Lynch's Dune. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm a huge devotee of the world that he created. It's a flawed masterpiece, but I don't know. Ever since I was a kid, I've always had a deep affinity for Dune and, of course, Star Wars, kind of at the same time. And when I was a kid, I had no fucking clue what that movie was about.
Yeah, I mean, Dune is a very, 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 very difficult book to adapt in general.
It's a very difficult book to adapt, but it is all. I think the reason it didn't do so well. Listen, there's one thing. If there's one thing you could say about David Lynch's vision, it's gorgeous.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, you know what I mean? It's really beautifully done. But he didn't get into the inner workings of the politics and stuff. He was just actually taking certain set pieces from the book and, just doing whatever with those. And I think that was the problem that people had with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got all the faith in the world in Denis Villeneuve. I don't know if it's going to be a better adaptation. I'm not sure. I'm excited to see what he brings to the table.
Yeah. I am too, actually. I really am.
Like we said, this is our last episode of the year. We're going to take a little bit of a hiatus after that. We've got this episode, which I hope you guys are really going to enjoy because we're excited to talk about it. And we've got an amazing podcast to end up on. We'll talk about that later on in the show.
We haven't even mentioned the topic yet, which is obviously freaks, mutants, disfigurements, otherwise, unfortunately, disfigured individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I find this topic really interesting because it's gone through so much. It's developed and gone through so many different iterations over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that cinema and the way that society treats freaks has completely evolved from when cinema was first being made in the 20s and 30s. So
oh yeah, absolutely.
I think it's really fascinating how to see that you know, the definition of freak almost has to develop too.
Well, I think a lot of people kind of stay in the realm of mutation to stay safe. You know what I mean? You know, because if you're going to tell like a really serious linear story about, you know, somebody that, you know, was born deformed or whatever, I mean, you know, you're obviously going to face some sort of backlash from somebody. So if you put it in a mutation aspect, then it's more, you know, it's more digestible, I guess, to an audience. You know what I mean? Oh, we're just watching a bunch of like monsters or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. The mutated people are definitely closer to the monster archetype.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look back at, you know, I want to look back at classic horror cinema. You know, the classic horror villains are all they're just you know disfigured, unfortunately disfigured people like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Just a hunchback.
Very tragic character.
Did nothing particularly wrong. Just looks horrible.
Yeah.
Phantom of the Opera, same. I mean, he does a lot of stuff wrong, so that sort of makes him a monster.
Yeah.
but what you know, the actual monstrous appearance of him is just his you know deformity from being burned. You know, like just or if you look at something like The Man Who Laughs,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the original silent film. You know that's
right, which we did mention. If you guys aren't familiar, is you know, you want to get into pop culture, that's the character the Joker was based on.
Yeah.
The design work for the Joker. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, it's classified as a horror film, but it's very much you know, it's a tragedy because of the main character who has been, you know, deformed to look a certain way, or
yeah.
you know, and so I don't know. That's what I find really interesting about the nature of horror in general.
Mm-hmm.
It's like back when Hollywood was first establishing itself, the horror films were about monsters, yes, but what constituted the monster was
the humanity. Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was also a lot more broad than it is now, you know.
Oh, sure, and they can get away with a lot more because you didn't have all these PC warriors running around trying to ruin your film if, you know, like you offended somebody or anything. You know what I mean? Like they had a lot more leeway to be able to tell that kind of tale without getting.
Well, and the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I think it's really interesting to look at it in terms of, or just in the light of the movie The Elephant Man. It's not a horror film, even though it's directed by David Lynch. But one gets the distinct idea that if the movie had been made back in, you know, 1930, 1935, it would have been a horror film.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I also think that Merrick would actually be played more of a monster than he was in this version. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, obviously there was that underlying thing, obviously, like, you know, he looked weird to people and, you know, whatever, they thought he was, you know, complete and utter creature, whatever, but that would definitely like go over the rails back in the 30s.
Well, but you look at it in terms of things like Frankenstein, who's basically just a freak, mm-hmm. Not particularly a horrible dude, but people, you know, recoil in fear, yeah. and you get sort of those vibes from The Elephant Man, which is it's an incredible drama, obviously with, you know, Oscar nominated performances and you know, just really intense cinematography and cool dreamlike sequences about, you know, this unfortunately, I guess, I don't know how, a genetically disfigured man, mm-hmm. named John Merrick, who had, you know, his skull is you know, is like deformed, and he's got,
it looks like cauliflower, you know what I mean? Like, it does.
Well, and his skin is all rough and it's got ridges on it, and one of his arms is like a club arm. He can't even use it. So it's basically an extreme example of genetic deformity. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the way that you would expect it to play out, had it been a horror film from 1930, the way it actually does play out in the film that was made is that the people of England discovered that he is a human being with, you know, with who's well spoken relatively and you know, well read and can really make, you know, is really just a pleasant person to be around.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and then, well, of course, ultimately, he is the one who decides his fate, which is another thing that would never have happened had it been made, you know, in the 1930s, when, you know, the freaks would always be lynched or, you know, attacked by the mob or you know,
or be the mob.
Sorry.
Or be the mob.
Or be the mob.
You know?
Or just, yeah, like you know, the monster is ultimately dispatched by society. But you know, in the Elephant Man, he's the one who takes his own fate into his hands, which is really it's really, you know, kind of relieving and sort of lovely to see, because yeah. At least for me, when you watch that film and you compare it to how cinema used to treat freaks like that, you're sort of like, okay, so this is evidence of a shifting paradigm, I think.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just put a freak into a movie and make it the bad guy anymore. You know, you have to sort of film around that and give it a greater depth than that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the other thing too is just, you know, the performances aren't B-movie in any way or tongue-in-cheek in any way. You know what I mean? Like, these are really solid performances, like award-winning or nominated performances. One of my favorite things about The Elephant Man, it's been quite some time since I've seen it, is all the reactions from Sir Anthony Hopkins, his doctor, especially when he first sees him for the first time. And you see all these different emotions, you know, kind of blended in all at once. His performance is incredible. Like, you see this fear, and then you also feel like some sort of sympathy in his eyes. You know what I mean? It's all just kind of like this microcosm of different feelings and emotions and stuff. It's really beautiful to see. But yeah, you know, it's not played in any fashion to make this guy look like some sort of, you know, creature. He's just a man with a very tragic, you know, disability, dare we say.
And that's what the movie hammers home. So I feel like, I don't know, it's a more, I don't want to say more developed, but it's definitely a more nuanced portrayal of freakdom.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And, you know, obviously we're going to get into this, you know, at least me, I'm going to get into some slashers and stuff, which, you know, kind of poke at that idea a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, but yeah, this one was just humanity at its core. And I guess that's kind of the irony of the movie, is that you're seeing somebody that looks the way that Joseph Merrick did, but, you know, it is a very human story. The thing I love most about it, and this is something that I mentioned when we were doing the podcast with Jennifer Lynch, you know, there was a lot of pushback when it came to studios and stuff, and they wanted it a certain way.
Yeah.
And, you know, just like, you know, he did with, like, you know, Cronenberg and Mel Brooks is one of my favorite people on the planet, not even just for his comedy, but just his business sense and his, you know, his savvy when it comes to, like, you know, listen, according to what happened was David Lynch was in a meeting with a bunch of studio execs, and they didn't want to work with Lynch initially. They were just like, you know, oh, you just want to work with this upstart rebel, you know, young guy that did a, you know, movie called Eraserhead that you saw like at some, you know, 5 and dime matinee, you know, 12, you know, midnight theater. It's, you know, and this is the guy. And he says, you know, we're not making this movie for primitives.
Yeah.
You know, like, we're not going to change anything. And this is our director. I mean, he really stuck his neck out for David Lynch.
He did. Absolutely.
That's one of my favorite stories of all time. We just mentioned The Elephant Man, and I do want to talk about another director that, you know, like, if I didn't tell you that he'd actually done, you know, this film, I think a lot of people would just be like, are you serious? Like, there's no way.
Yeah.
of course, we're going to be talking about Kevin Smith's Tusk, which we do have to mention.
Such a great film.
I've mentioned in past podcasts that, Kevin Smith is one of my heroes, just, from, a personable standpoint when it comes to his fans and the way they feel, comfortable around him. The fact that he, always, puts a wing around his friends and takes them with him when it comes to his success. And, not only that, but just, the fact that I am originally from the East Coast and, there was all these movies that were coming out, like movies that inspired Kevin Smith even before he did Clerks, like Slacker and stuff like that. So there, there was, movies about kids in California and their kids in, like Texas, Austin, Texas and stuff like that. But Clerks was the first time where we were actually represented. Because that's what we used to do. We used to hang outside convenience stores, shoot the shit about comic books and Star Wars and smoke cigarettes and shit. That's exactly what the fuck we did when we were kids. When, obviously like, 15, 16. So yeah, that was kind of the battle cry for East Coast kids. But yeah, he does these 2 horror movies. And like I said, if I had told you that he directed these, I think a lot of people would just be, like, no way. Guy does like Mallrats and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Red State was another one that was just, really ballsy, like, and, like, I personally think it's a work of art. I think, the religious cult aesthetic works really well.
Yeah, well, and the whole rednecks with guns thing is a cliche, but in Red State, it's much more suspenseful.
Absolutely.
Than usual, but
yeah.
Maybe because they're like concentrated in this cult, and so it's like, oh, okay, well,
yeah, and there's
scary, stupid people are only so they're scary and stupid when they're by themselves, but you get a bunch of them together in the same place, it gets fucking terrifying and dangerous.
Absolutely, and you've got this, this standoff happening with the FBI and stuff, and just that film you wouldn't expect, Kevin Smith to direct at all. And of course, the same thing with Tusk, which, I've seen a lot of people, say it was, like akin to like a trauma film or something like that. I really don't agree with that sentiment.
Well, I find it really surprising that this film didn't get amazing reviews across the board, because people, its ratings or, people's opinions of it are not, all that great, and that completely baffles me. Mm-hmm. Because you will never watch a movie like this ever again in your life.
No.
And to me, that is a mark of a great film. Is when you watch something and you're like, wow, okay, I literally have never seen anything like that before, and I never will again. And that's a valuable experience to me. So when people be like, oh, that movie's not good, it's like, well, what are you talking about? Like, when's the last time you saw a film about, well, I mean, we're going to be getting into major spoilers here, but a podcaster named Wallace, mm-hmm. who, who's going off into the Canadian wilderness for a story, for a story to talk about on his podcast. Mm-hmm. And he ends up having to scramble for something and ends up in the large home in the middle of nowhere of a creepy old man named Howard Howe.
Yep. Played by the wonderful Michael Parks. One of my favorite character actors of all time.
Great role. Yeah.
Somebody who, obviously passed a few years ago, but, somebody like Quentin Tarantino absolutely believed in this man. Like, he even saw, like the old television shows that he did and some really, like awful, films from back in the day, and really just, just believed in this man to the point where I think it also rubbed off on Kevin, to want to work with him. And I think after he saw him play, like a 5-minute part as a sheriff in the beginning of From Dusk Till Dawn. So that's, that's where Michael Parks came in the equation when it came to Kevin Smith, because he did see him From Dusk Till Dawn and absolutely fell in love with his work. Before we, get further into the summary, though, I did want to mention that, I am a huge fan of Kevin Smith. I'm proud member of the Kevin Smith Club. I listen to his podcast and stuff all the time. And, I do remember the podcast from years ago before the movie even, was even conceived, where him and his friend Scott Mosier, his producer friend Scott Mosier, were actually talking about this ad where this guy in Canada was supposedly looking for somebody to lease, you know, like in his beautiful home, as it said in the ad, beautiful home, and all you have to do is occasionally dress like a walrus a couple hours a day, eat like fish in front of me. And of course, this became like a 2.5 hour fucking show where Kevin, you know, immediately said at the end of it, he goes, I gotta make this fucking movie. And then he ended up going on social media and he said, all right, guys, well, if you want me to do it, you know, it's walrus yes or walrus no. And people resoundingly said, walrus yes. And
how can you say walrus no? It's walruses. Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, so he goes to meet Michael Parks, who's this, you know, very reclusive old man. And you had mentioned before in our conversations that you felt that you also felt some Lovecraftian vibes with this.
Oh, absolutely. It just something about like the cultish attitude of the old man and the fact that he's in this old, like, I mean, it's Canadian in the film, but it's very, it feels very New Englandy, like old school New Englandy with, you know, in the middle of the woods and with like, you know, I don't know. I mean, I felt Lovecraft vibes completely.
I think this one definitely does because, you know, it does have your, you know, your old man in the sea vibes, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know,
For
so
sure.
it does involve the ocean and whatnot. Yeah, I can definitely get Lovecraft from this. I don't think Kevin would say the same thing. I think he'd probably be like, really? Holy shit, man. I didn't fucking think of that, you know? But he's modest. So, yeah. So, obviously, Justin Long's character is, you know, talking to Mr. Howard. And
he drugs the tea.
And, I mean, really intense. I wouldn't even call it surgery. I mean, it's absolute torture what he does to this guy.
Yeah. I mean, when Wallace comes to, he wakes up and he's missing his legs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost, yeah, it's strangely boxing Helena-esque in that way.
Very much so. Yeah.
Just removing someone's body parts in a meticulous sort of nightmare.
But also the fact that he's still not subservient to this guy. He's still yelling and whenever he can, like, fuck you, motherfucker, I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker, for this, you know?
Yeah.
It's never, you know, it's never like a losing situation. Like, even, you know, all the torture he's going through, he's still got his wits to him where it's just like, I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, but also like with the character of Wallace, just Long's character. I mean, you go into the film knowing he's sort of a douchebag. He's not really a great guy. But then you watch the whole first half of the movie and you're like, okay, this is my protagonist. This is who I need to get behind. And you try to, and until you get to, you know, the midpoint of the film when he's being dismembered by this crazy old man. And
you know what his character's like? It's really like you are feeling at some point some sort of sympathy for like Logan Paul or something. You know what I mean?
Well, just when you start to feel sympathy for him, they flash back to him and his girlfriend before he leaves, and he's just the biggest dick.
Yeah.
Like, he's such a dick that when you go back to him being in this old man's mansion, getting mutilated, you almost relish in it in a weird way because he's such a horrible person. You're kind of like, you know, because at this point his podcast co-host and his ex-girlfriend.
But it also helps too that his girlfriend is such a good person. You know what I mean?
Well, they've you know, he's missing, so they've come to try and find him at this point. But I don't know. There's a really, for me at least, there was a sense of emotional detachment when you found out that this main character is just such a douchebag.
So let's talk about you know, because this was part of what Kevin was going to call the True North trilogy, I believe. This is the first one, and then he did Yoga Hosers, which, you know, and he was going to do Moose Jaws, which is Jaws with a moose.
Why has that not happened yet?
But there is actually a character named Guy Lapointe, played by Johnny Depp, innocent, and Yeah, that was shocking. You know, I think the first time to see Johnny Depp show up as a
you barely recognize
looking
him.
Canadian detective, I guess.
Yeah, and it's such a cookie role for him because he's such a star now that like he's in a movie and it's like Johnny Depp, but for them to him just show up in like the latter third of this film as like a kooky detective, it's like what?
And give like a fucking literally like a Hercule Poirot dissertation that lasts maybe 15 minutes long.
Yeah,
long.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Amount of dialogue. You know, then of course, you know, his daughter and Harley Quinn Smith, Kevin Smith's daughter, in there, and that was supposed to, you know, like show their characters, you know, the convenience store girls, and you know that goes into yoga hosers or whatever. So it was supposed to be like this whole universal thing. So basically, I guess the last thing to talk about when it comes to you know, this particular film is that Justin Long becomes a very, very deformed. You know, he's obviously in a suit, but he's a walrus.
Yeah, and but he is, and but you know, the film has been meticulous enough in describing how the old man went about turning him into a walrus, like taking his leg bones and filing them down into tusks, so he could actually have tusks. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, that's the kind of thing it's body horror, but it's also just
right. Like he was just so dismembered and mangled. Like if you even took him out of the walrus suit, like it would be pointless. There's nothing left of this guy.
Yeah. But you know, as the episode goes, he's turned into a freak, mm-hmm. you know, and I think it's got a really interesting closing scene too.
Oh my God, I love when Michael Parks gets in his own walrus suit and they have like a literal like Natural Geographic fight with each other. Holy shit!
Yeah,
that's when the movie literally goes woo. The train goes completely off the rails, and you're like, I really love what I'm watching, but what the fuck am I watching right now?
Well, I had skipped a little bit more to the end when his ex-girlfriend and his podcast co-host are sort of looking at him in this reserve where he's eating fish, you know, as a walrus and acting and living as a walrus, and they're just sort of looking at him like, kind of like you would look at a freak in a freak show, like sort of half sad, half like, huh.
And there's just a single tear that rolls down his face as he's got fish in front of him, you know, like in his little.
I guess that's the best for them, you know.
Pretty rough. It's, you know, like I wouldn't necessarily call that you know, we talked about how we like endings that aren't necessarily happy. I would definitely say Tusk is not a happy ending at all.
No, but it's not happy at all, but it's appropriate, and I think it's part of what sets it into this category, this freaks and mutants category is the ending, which is just like, you know, Wallace as a walrus in an enclosure as his former friends.
Right. Like he accepted. You know, like if it was me, like put a bullet in my brain right now. I do not want to live like this. And he was just like, yeah, you know, like I guess I am what I am. I am the walrus. Goo 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 joob.
Bam.
What's next on your list?
Well, I'm gonna go back to the 80s, as I always love to. Mm-hmm. This movie, I think it came to mind immediately when we first started talking about the Freaks and Mutants thing, mm-hmm. because it's even though the film itself is completely off the wall, mm-hmm. it raises a lot of interesting questions about the nature of freakdom, I think, and the nature of like genetics and you know, and Siamese twins and what happens, you know. Mm-hmm. Although that you watch the movie and you're like, that was fucking bonkers.
Are we talking about a Frank?
Of course, I'm talking about Basket Case.
Nice.
Frank Henenlotter's Basket Case, which was filmed for like a nothing budget. Like they had no money for this movie. Yes. None. Mm-hmm. like well, I mean, for those of you who don't know, I guess there are people who have never seen Basket Case. It's about a man named Wayne.
There's a few in our circle, I guess.
It's about a man named Wayne who checks into a hotel. He's got a basket with him, and he carries it with him wherever he is. Well, this is after the opening scene where a doctor is mysteriously stalked by something that, that just sort of skitters across the ceiling and then jumps into his house and scrapes his face off. And you're like, oh, it's got to be some like rat or creature or something. No,
it's his brother.
it's this man's brother, deformed mutant brother, who's basically just hands and a
Which
face.
Is surprising because you said the movie cost nothing to make. The design is fucking phenomenal.
Oh, totally. Well, but you can tell because the brother, he doesn't really have a name. I think he calls him Belial once, which is like a demonic name.
Belial, yeah.
But I mean, he's puppeted the entire time. I mean, it's like he, it's clearly somebody's just like putting their fingers into his hands and making him go, ah! And I think the one instance when he's like freestanding and not being puppeted, they tried to do like stop motion, and it's just awful. It looks terrible. But I mean, the basis is that this man and his brother, the freak mutant brother, has decided that they are going to take revenge on the 3 doctors that separated them. And there's a flashback in the middle of the film, which is really effective and really totally gnarly about how they were born, as conjoined twins and killed the mother because of their shape. And this is the kind of thing where, despite the ridiculousness of the movie, it sort of makes you wonder, like, because the dad is like, oh, that's my son, and that's a monster. And it's sort of like, where do you sort of draw the line, like, because when it comes to like people who are born with deformities like that, or born like conjoined, or born like, they're disabled people born without arms, who get around on little carts, and they're people, So why is this little half deformed alien thing not a person?
Right.
Or if you look at from a scientific basis, like there are people who have those tumors that have DNA in them that grow, and they have like actual legit human hair and teeth.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's, nobody would call that a person. But I mean, the film itself is it's fun as hell and ridiculous, and they take revenge upon the doctors who separated them. Obviously, it's the deformed basket twin who conveniently seems to have giant like nail claws on his hands that he uses to dismember people and cut their faces up and do all sorts of horrible things. And and eventually the proprietor of the hotel catches on, and so do the other residents, and all hell breaks loose. So
and it crafted a franchise, which is the most insane thing, that there was actually
sequels.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But you go back and watch it. It's especially for a film that was made on practically no budget. It's pretty freaking fun and impressive.
Well, I'm going to talk about an 80s film that's on my list that I don't think it's a real lot of like gets a ton of attention, but people that have seen it like absolutely love it. And the interesting thing is, Basket Case did like garner a couple sequels, and this one was like a one-shot deal, done, that's it. And it was called Neon Maniacs, and absolutely, Neon Maniacs, the title had absolutely nothing to do with the movie whatsoever, and it was literally just it was a simple story about this group of damned, they call it the damned, that were underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, and they attack a bunch of teenagers, and one just happens to break free, and she tries to tell other people that there's these creatures that are underneath the bridge. Nobody believes her, and of course all hell breaks loose when these things arise and start attacking people and whatnot. Now here's the great thing about this movie is that the design work was basically just everything that you could possibly imagine. I mean, they were mutants, and one was a cop for some reason, looked like a cop, and one looked like a surgeon, and one, you know what I mean? Like,
what were they what were they mutated by? I've never seen the film personally.
Well, that's the thing. You never really knew. Like, there was actually a scene in the movie that I think that's the problem with the movie itself, was that, like, cinematically it looked really nice, and the prosthetics and a lot of makeup work, like, looked really good for the most part when it came to the creatures or the mutants or whatever. But there's actually a scene in the movie where this guy like finds like a set of baseball cards with these things on them, like trading cards. Like, where the fuck did they come from? You know what I mean? Like, it's, so, I mean, it wasn't necessarily like, one of those things where, you love it for this, great story or whatever. It was cheesy as all hell. But it was just a cool fucking movie, because these things were like, kind of like a mix between Cenobites and something out of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I mean,
while we're talking mutants, the most famous mutants of all time are the Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, like, there was so much, to this one film that they could have played with and could have had, sequels for years and years, and better, maybe even better films. You know what I mean? The fact, that you have this, young survivor girl that actually, went through this situation with these creatures and stuff. You could have made her like, like the ultimate neon maniac monster hunter or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, there was a lot of, there was a lot of heft, when it came to like, different ideas that you could have played with. And it was only a one-shot deal. And the main actress, it was actually her first and only movie. Like, she never did anything else after that. What's next on your list?
It's actually a relatively recent film that I wanted to talk about. That's really sort of, it's a 2018 movie. It's really, really weird. Mm-hmm. Really sort of dark and melancholy, and has this sort of, this palpable sense of like loneliness hanging over it. Mm-hmm. It's a Swedish film. It's called Border.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's about, on the surface, it's about this woman who works as a border agent, from America to Canada, and she, because she has this uncanny sense of smell, mm-hmm. she can sniff out, like, people who are smuggling drugs or whatever they're smuggling. She can also smell their emotions, smell their fear. And she
reminds me of this one episode of Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where like Dennis, one of the main guys, was writing a script. And he was like wanting to do a movie about a scientist played by Dolph Lundgren that could smell crime.
I mean, that's kind of what she can do. Mm-hmm. But she's, she looks, she's a little bit off, like she can pass for human, but it's not quite, there's just something not quite right mm-hmm. about her. And she gets involved in this child trafficking case mm-hmm. that she gets involved with because of her job at the border, and she's clearly a very alienated person. Like, she doesn't know where she just doesn't feel like a person. Mm-hmm. Like, she has this house, and she has a freeloader who lives there just because, and he breeds dogs, and she just doesn't really care about much. She goes to work, she comes home, and she doesn't have any passions in life at all. Like, you can tell something's missing.
Yeah.
And then a man comes through customs, the border that she patrols, and he looks similar to her. He looks like her. He's got a similar facial structure and everything, and she's a little freaked out, and you know, and they find you know, insects in his bag that he's, you know, studying bees and something, and they decide to do a strip search. But what they find is that, well, he's got not normal sexual organs, basically. And eventually these two people, the man who comes to the border and the woman, the border guard, Tina, her name is, the man basically tells her, well, and another thing is during his strip search, they pull off his clothes and he's got a scar along the back, his lower back. And then he's got not normal sexual organs. And Tina is actually taken aback by this because she also has a scar along her lower back. And her father always told her it was because she had an accident when she was a kid. But what this man tells her is that, no, you're a troll. We're trolls. Both of us are trolls.
Nice.
And you know, and your sense of smell is normal for trolls. And trolls are basically, they're literally able to switch sexual organs depending on what kind of sex they want to have. And which is, it's really out there.
Good skill.
But it's, you know, it's not like anything you've seen in the other movie. And of course, what Tina finds out is that the scar on her back is where they cut her tail off, because trolls are born with tails. But eventually, I mean, you know, she discovers that the man Vor is actually responsible for the child trafficking ring, because he has been wanting to switch troll babies with human fetuses as like a changeling thing. These mutant troll babies, trolls can just produce babies that are unfertilized, and they have to be fertilized to actually grow. So she digs into his refrigerator and she finds all these boxes full of unfertilized troll babies, like mutant troll babies. It's like, whoa, dude. It's really freaky. Tina is basically, she has to reconcile with herself, like, I don't want to hurt people, so I guess, does that make me human? You know? Or does that make me a freak, not a freak?
It kind of feels like, you know, like a good majority of Guillermo del Toro movies where like the fairy tale creatures were pushed back by humanity to the point where people didn't even realize they existed anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, but it's also, it's bizarre because it has like this gritty feel to it, and it's not magical in any way. Yeah. Like, it's just absolutely base,
just a woman seeing, you know, problems with her, issues with her body that she wasn't aware of, and
yeah,
turns out she's actually a fantastical thing.
And that's the beautiful thing about this film is that you know, the main character Tina is, you know, she thinks she's a freak, like she's the whole concept of freak in this film is sort of turned on its head, because she thinks she's a freak, and then she realizes, oh, you know, I'm not a freak, I'm just this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then she embraces being that kind of thing. And it helps her existence. It gives her purpose, which I think is really, really poetic in a way.
Yeah. When it comes to mutants, let's talk about one that, you know what? I got to bring it up first before we talk about the original. But my whole thing is this, is that, you know, I know for years, speaking of Kevin Smith, I think Kevin Smith was actually, was initially signed on to write or direct or something, like this was like maybe like 6 years ago, 7 years ago or something like that. They were wanting to do a major feature production of the Toxic Avenger, you know, which of course is the, you know, the godfather of Troma, and, you know, that's, you know, how, you know, Troma came to be. And we were, you know, it was just announced that Legendary is actually going to do their own film, you know, and
like a big budget Toxic Avenger.
Yeah, like a big budget Toxic Avenger. And Peter Dinklage has been signed on for the film. Peter Dinklage, of course, I Drink and I Know Things, Game of Thrones. I don't know how that's going to work. And honestly, like, my whole thing is like, when you go back and you actually do the research for the film itself, back in the 80s, not even including inflation, only cost like $500,000 to make. And oddly enough, it was actually something that Lloyd Kaufman wanted to do after working on an even greater movie, which he was working on the set of Rocky at the time. And then he decided, I'm going to do a movie that's based in a health spa. That was the main, you know what I mean? Like, he was just thinking of the setting. It's a health spa. That's what I want to do. So they spent $500,000 to make the Toxic Avenger. And, I mean, that's why it's so charming. I would think, because, like, it didn't cost any money to make, and it's silly and goofy or whatever. So, if you make like this Avengers Endgame of the Toxic Avenger, I'm just really hoping that they, like, even with, like the money that they obviously have, that they, kind of dial it back a bit and, kind of bring it to you know what I mean? Like, if they did something like Deadpool, for example, that would make more sense than, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like a film that's self-aware.
Yeah, like a film that
knows that it comes from this tradition. And
right, and also the thing with Deadpool was it didn't really cost, considering what Marvel has in terms of, like, cash flow when it comes to making these epic Infinity Wars and Endgames and stuff like that. Like, Deadpool was really low on the totem pole when it first came out, when it came to finances.
Oh yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? So I hope they kind of stay in that vein if they're going to do anything with the Toxic Avenger.
Well, and I think that's part of the problem with big budget remakes. Mm-hmm. Is they take something that was charming for what it was, not because the budget was low, but because they succeeded just in spite of it. Mm-hmm. And so then to just go back and, like, throw a whole bunch of money at something that became iconic despite its lack of budget just feels, I don't know, like, it feels hollow when they do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So, let's talk about the, like, just like the house that Freddie built when it comes to New Line Cinema, let's talk about the house that Toxie built, which is Troma. And I'm not a huge Troma head at all. But I do appreciate the Toxic Avenger. And the weird thing is, like, I was actually into that whole, the character arc and stuff because of the cartoon when I was growing up. I never saw the movie until I was, like, maybe 13, 14.
Yeah, I mean? The only thing, I was, my knowledge of the Toxic Avenger was through the cartoon.
Was the cartoon, right.
Yeah.
Which had the environmental slant to it and stuff.
Absolutely, yep.
But initially, it was just a film that cost $500,000, as I said before, which involves a janitor at a fitness club, and he's being tormented by, punks, as they tend to work out there all the time. These toughs. And they basically trick him into kissing a sheep and wearing a tutu one day. And he ends up getting tossed out of a window and falls into a vat of toxic waste.
As one does.
Immediately, like, lights, his entire body incinerates, and he, he's running, down the street or whatever. And then it's
very common, that toxic waste.
What's that?
Like the toxic waste, like, people in these fictional stories, they're always just falling into toxic waste.
Yeah.
Like Daredevil, just damn, oh, there's some toxic waste. Ninja Turtles, oh shit, toxic waste.
Right.
Like, you would think people are just...
In passing, we do have to talk about Clarence Bonaker's, one of his right-hand men that, like, literally, like, just gets destroyed by toxic waste at the end of RoboCop. Help me! Get off me, man!
I mean, maybe it wasn't just an 80s thing. Like, it felt like an 80s, I don't know. It's just like there's toxic waste just everywhere.
Toxic Avenger, I mean, there's really not a lot to get into. He becomes, the hero of New Jersey, and, is basically...
I just love that it's New Jersey.
Yeah, he's fighting off...
It's so appropriate.
Corrupt cops, that happen to, be part of the, the mob in some fashion. I mean, it's just a fun fucking movie, but, when it comes to, like, freaks and mutants, you definitely have to at least bring up the first Toxic Avenger if you're gonna, you know what I mean? If you're gonna basically, like honor, Freaks and Mutants in an episode. I, when I saw it when I was a teen, I just thought it was fun. It was enjoyable. It's not cutesy in any way. I mean, there is an attempted rape, and there's nudity and stuff like that. So it was really funny after you saw that, to think to yourself like, man, I watched a cartoon about this shit.
They made a really wholesome 80s cartoon about this.
Yep.
And they added this great eco theme, like, yeah.
It's great marketing.
Hugo Studios, like that's impressive.
It is, very much so. And two totally different things from each other.
Yeah.
And there was, I guess there was a sequel because, Lloyd felt he filmed too much with the first one, and he had enough footage to make a second one. And I don't think the sequels were as successful as the first. I'm sure there's a huge fan base for all three, but
never are, but
yeah. And the other thing I will say about the sequels is, obviously I think, even with the small budget they had, I think the makeup effects just got better and better with, Toxie himself. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, he just looked cooler, like, as time went on.
That is a positive with sequels to 80s films, is that the special effects can only get better.
Yeah, for sure. I just, I just don't understand what they're going to do. And it has nothing to do with Peter Dinklage's height or anything like that. Like, are they going to fucking, like Steve Rogers, like the Toxic Avenger, where, like, he just becomes this, giant after, like being hit with toxic waste? I mean, I just don't understand what they're going to do.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm kind of fascinated. Yeah, that'll be an interesting thing.
It's amazing.
I mean, Peter Dinklage is a fucking phenomenal actor. Period.
Oh, he really is, and he's super funny, and he's the perfect guy for the role. If he's actually playing the Toxic, he could be playing the villain. Nobody ever really said what he's gonna do. But it's just amazing to me that a major studio in 2020, almost 2021, wants to make a Toxic Avenger movie in the first place. That's just really wild.
Yeah.
What's next on your list?
Well, I wanted to talk about, we're talking about disfigurements and mutants and horrible people who have been, rendered unrecognizable. Mm-hmm. Particularly, we're talking about in the classic horror films, Phantom of the Opera mm-hmm. It's a classic. And the film Phantom of the Paradise, which I think I brought up briefly in our LGBT episode, yes, but only to mention the sort of not okay portrayal of the glam rocker beef.
Yeah.
And that's only a small portion of the film. I mean, to be perfectly honest, this film is amazing and batshit and a good combination of Phantom of the Opera, Faust, mm-hmm. and
Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, Rocky Horror Picture Show too. Yeah, absolutely. It involves this songwriter, Winslow Leach, who has his magnum opus stolen by this big, producer guru named Swan.
Yeah.
Who basically manufactures top pop bands and molds them into whatever the public wants at that particular moment.
Yeah.
And Winslow Leach discovers that his song has been stolen and is being used as the ultimate opener for The Paradise, which is going to be a new venue that Swan is opening. And of course, Swan discovers that he's trying to infiltrate his building, and he kicks him out and he puts him in jail, and Winslow Leach just goes through hell. He's just, and it's actually really funny stuff. That's the bizarre thing about Phantom of the Paradise, is that it's simultaneously messed up but also hilarious.
Yeah.
But what ultimately happens is that Winslow Leach tries to infiltrate the record company when he realizes that they're mass producing records of the song that he wrote that they stole. and he tries to destroy the records, but he ends up falling into the record press and getting his face pressed by the record press.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking.
And the thing even before that, the thing that makes him super weird looking is when he was in jail, he was subject to like this experimental dentistry, thing where they replaced all of his teeth with metal.
Yeah.
So we've got this deformed dude who wears a metal helmet and he's got metal teeth.
Probably, you know what? I would even go as far as, obviously on the Colt side of things, and probably one of the most iconic designs you've ever.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I mean? Like when he's all, in his full regalia and stuff. Yeah, like that's.
Yeah. Well, and I've seen people even like or on online forums or something when they're like, yeah, I saw this movie when I was a kid and I don't remember. All I remember is there was like a helmet and a spiral and like this eye sticking out. And that's, that's all you need from Fan of the Paradise.
Let's talk about The Hills Have Eyes. Of course, Wes Craven, based on the Sawney Bean family, which is, technically a family of cannibals. There's a whole backstory to that. But, I think Craven was, even, when it came to like, Nightmare on Elm Street, there was, different, physiology and stuff that he, like delved into or, so, it's pretty much the same thing with this. He heard a story, like an old timey story of a real family and then was just like, oh yeah, like there's definitely some meat to this bone, no pun intended.
Yeah. Well, and it totally added to the mythology of the backwoods creepy cannibal redneck family.
Yeah.
Which I don't want to say was started by Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but that was like the first major entry into it.
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, just like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it seemed like they're, it seemed to me more escapable than something like this. If you're in, if you're in a territory like a desert and you're literally out in the fucking middle of nowhere, like you are screwed.
Yeah.
And I think that, that environment worked very effectively, it's just simply from an aspect of how the fuck are they going to find their way out of this place? Like it's,
and I think it's also a, at least in The Hills Have Eyes, Wes Craven also he pointedly made this family out to be like not human, like freakish, not just cannibalistic, which, of course, a lot of other movies, they're perfectly normal people who happen to eat other people.
Right.
But I think in this case, the family was portrayed as being off. Just not.
Yeah. They were portrayed as like, inbred mutants. But the interesting thing was there was no real garish makeup to them or anything. I think.
No, not at all.
You know what I mean? So, you're just supposed to look at somebody like Michael Berryman and go, he's a very sweet man. I'm not going to talk shit about Michael.
Oh, he's great. But again, but that's, again, that's our, society's treatment of people who look weird or look different.
Right.
He probably, was a laughingstock his whole life.
Oh, absolutely. And, like if people aren't familiar, I'm not really too sure of the actual disease that he has, but he just has no sweat glands. Like there's just, a lot of people, just consider them the oddball looking guy and, like the go-to to play an antagonist because of the way he looked. And, he made a whole career out of it. But
can you imagine growing up looking like that? Like his life must have been hell.
Yeah, I think.
And then he finds a career by playing, a mutant, which is great. It's great that he was able to reclaim that, Mm-hmm. But it's I don't know. It says something about us as a society that we can only appreciate people who look like that when we put them on a screen, so we can sort of gawk at them.
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't say anything like, him getting into his career is brave or anything. That's the worst word to use. I think it's more, I don't know. It's like you said, it's like taking your power back to a certain extent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, look what I'm doing with, with the supposed weird look that I have, and making a really solid career out of it. And the guy's still beloved to this day.
Absolutely.
So it's, he turned his life around, and he could have, really, I honestly, I don't even know, I've never really heard him talk about it. You know what I mean? So I don't know if he's actually like, I'm sure he's dealt with some sort of pain and, all this stuff, you know what I mean? Why am I like this and that kind of thing? But you would never know it by talking to him, and you would never know it, but, by, like meeting him at a convention or encountering him in any way.
Yeah.
Just like,
no, he's great.
Just like everybody.
But let's talk about the real heroes of this movie, the original.
Mm-hmm.
The fucking dog.
Oh yeah.
The pair of German shepherds, one of them runs off and is killed by the family. And the remaining one is, I say, along with the husband, Dee Wallace's husband, who actually gets revenge. I'd say the dog, this German Shepherd, is one of the, the revenge heroes of the whole film.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just so satisfying to me.
Oh yeah.
Especially because the initial scene when the hillbillies first come down from the hills and they're in their trailer and it's just brutal, like just everybody dies, just bam, 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 like it's not even a slow burn when they come and into the trailer, like everybody just is dead.
Yeah, that's when the movie really goes full tilt, because there is a lot of exposition with that family in the very beginning. And interestingly enough, you would think somebody of his caliber, somebody that's just been, promoting cult and trash films his entire fucking career. When I interviewed Joe Bob Briggs, he even said that the remake of Hills Have Eyes, which is, something we're going to talk about in a second, is better than the original to him, because there's just something off to the original. Not even just the scope of it and stuff. Like his whole thing was he could see, that Wes Craven is just, like kind of like a fledgling director at this point. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It looks very DIY. I guess, I don't know. There are some problems to the original, I think. But the family's a standout for sure. The Mutant family, and of course Michael Berryman.
Yeah,
that's something that I think I wouldn't be surprised if there's anyone out there right now that has like an original Hills Have Eyes poster on their wall just because of that image of Michael. You know what I mean? So fucking iconic. Let's get into the remake. So basically, the remake was. There was a period where Wes Craven, I think, was looking back at his, his classic work, just like he did with Last House on the Left. He just, decided that he wanted to be executive producer on a story that maybe could be better somehow. Mm-hmm. He kind of felt that way with the Hills Have Eyes, and he actually, he ran through the gamut of, trying to find the proper, cinematographer, the proper director. And I think after seeing Hot Tension by Alexandre Aja, he was like, yeah, this is my guy. So, not only is Alexandre Aja an incredible director, he just, like there was, there was just a scope and scale to this movie that just made it so much more larger than life than the original. Obviously, like, time, there's, time and, weather, like it's it's a cult classic, and it came out at a certain time and it looks kind of weathered and like whatever. I think this one was obviously more stylized, because it was like filmed in the early 2000s.
2006 or something
2006
like that?
Yeah. So the 2006 remake basically starts off with this family that's headed to California for their mother and father's wedding anniversary. And that they're played by Ted Levine, of course, Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, and Kathleen Quinlan. Really great cast, I thought. Like the one thing that, really stuck out for me, especially for this one, is that you actually gave a shit about the family this time around. You know what I mean? There was just more weight to them. They were more likable. And even though you didn't really, spend a lot of time with them, it just like, you just felt like, maybe knew the family a little bit more than you did. You know what I mean? Like without all that exposition and, like just elapsed time of hanging out with these people where you just said like, Jesus Christ, can we fucking have something happen already? So they're in New Mexico, which is obviously like, a lot of people feel that's like the main site for nuclear testing or whatnot. And, the whole thing with that was there was only one major nuclear test in New Mexico. And this family was told to leave, and they didn't. They decided they wanted to stay in their home. So while they were doing this nuclear testing blast, it, basically like, irradiated this family and turned them into a bunch of, mutant freaks. So that's already cool in itself. And man, I think KMB actually did the effects for this movie. I mean, the effects on these people are fucking insanely incredible. Except for Billy Drago. Billy Drago is actually the patriarch of the family. He's the only one that doesn't have, that mutant look to him. And I'm talking mutant look. And they and supposedly like they really went into like, the archives when it comes to Chernobyl and all that stuff. And they really, tried to make, these people as realistic as possible, while making them monstrous, but at the same time, like actually, doing medically accurate things to them, I guess.
Right.
So it, pretty much like, runs like the original, except for the fact that, well, I will say this, the rape scene in the trailer is just really, really harsh and really, really long. You got, one of the sons, like, actually, one of the, of course, the sisters has a child, and, he's like, sucking on her nipple, and it gets pretty rough. And they have her watching as, the other giant, monstrous brother, Jupiter, like, rapes her sister, like in the bed in the trailer and shit. It's pretty hardcore. But that's not why you watch the movie. I think the reason why it works so well is because the father, after his little girl is taken by this family, becomes one of the best final men, dare I say, you'll ever see in a film. This is a guy who is just so milquetoast in the beginning of this movie. And when he realizes that his daughter has been taken from him, he literally steps into fucking hell to get her back. And it's so satisfying and so amazing to watch. This guy literally turned into a hero right before your eyes, because there's nothing heroic about this guy in this film. Nothing. So he walks, with, the dog that's left, because it's the whole situation. There's two dogs named Beauty and Beast. Gets killed by the family. He ends up taking the other dog, German Shepherd, to basically like going through this, mine, and finds, the family, like, at this, I guess the house used to be like a nuclear testing site or whatever. So they're all just hanging out in there. And he just like fucking decimates every single one of them, and really, really gets fucked up in the process. And that, just that, that actual cause and effect works so well, because, he's not, dare I say, a Mary Sue, you know what I mean? Like, hurt really fucking bad. I just think it's more effective, from the effects standpoint. As a matter of fact, Greg Nicotero makes a appearance in the movie as one of the family members, called Cyst. There is a sequel, and the sequel is really fun too. And it's just basically just, it's a no-brainer. It's, this military group, like young military that are, doing their, training out in the desert, and they end up, encountering this fucked up family and end up getting picked off one by one. And, but this time they have actual, like, weapons and whatnot. And it's just a lot of fun to watch. But this one, like I said, just from an effect standpoint, I think it's a lot better. From a family dynamic standpoint, it's a lot better because, like I said, you actually appreciate this family a lot more than the original, I think. And of course, the father Doug that takes the hero's journey at the end is so fucking great. It's so well done. And of course he gets his daughter back and everything. And there is that stinger at the end where you're thinking, oh, like this family's like all gone and stuff, and then you see somebody like basically like looking in binoculars and shit, and you're just like, okay. So yeah, it's one of the best remakes I've ever seen. What's next on your list?
I mean, do you want to talk about The Brood?
Yes, let's talk about The Brood. Little David Cronenberg action, which definitely needs to be in the mix for sure. The Brood is interesting, because if people aren't familiar with The Brood, I think The Brood is, I wouldn't necessarily call it the least well known of Cronenberg's work, but it's
definitely one of the more obscure ones. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly obscure. But this is a story that Cronenberg actually wrote in the middle of a divorce, which obviously makes this movie so much more effective. Because you are seeing two characters that I think he actually, like, when it came to the actual casting of the film, he tried to find characters that were likened to him and his ex-wife. So there were some real serious similarities there between the actual actors that he chose. But yeah, please, let's talk about.
Well, but I also find that it's such a really powerful, not indictment, but cautionary tale about just psychology and psychiatric treatment.
Right, and also that relationships fucking suck for the most part. Like, David Cronenberg hates relationships.
Well, yes. But as I was saying, I mean, I guess you could tie that relationship thing into what the creepy relationship the wife was having with her psychiatrist, which wasn't sexual, but still gave rise to creepy mutant children. So it's the whole thing is very metaphysical in that it begins as a story about emotions and psychology and people at odds with each other. Mm-hmm. And by the end of the film, you've realized that there are physical manifestations of that emotional friction. Mm-hmm. Which I think is just amazing, because I can't think of any other film that.
Well, look at it this way. I mean, like, it actually does make sense. You know what I mean? If you're not thinking of it from a sci-fi horror standpoint, if you are in a relationship that is a negative and you actually happen to have children around, then it becomes a situation of nature versus nurture. Is that person or is that kid actually going to, like, say the father's abusive or drinking or whatever? Are they actually going to go and take that trait into their own lives and into their own relationships and stuff? So technically, that could be the rage baby metaphor. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. But
there's definitely a lot more to that than, meets the eye, I think.
I agree, but at the same time, I think
Cronenberg was never a linear man when it came to storytelling. There's always.
I think the conceptual, like, the fact that they're not even babies. They're miniature human beings.
They're miniature
human beings, like blonde human beings with no belly button, and just sort of like this weird, like, crunched face and weird DNA. And I think when they find one of them dead at one of the crime scenes, they study it and they discover all sorts of non-human things about it.
Let's go back to the relationship between Nola and her ex-husband. The fact that they have a child.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so amused. I just love this. I'm reminded of the animal disaster episode when you're like, yeah, the characterization, the relationships, and I'm just like, high body count.
Yeah.
Anyway, keep going.
No, so like basically it does involve this ex-husband, ex-wife relationship. They happen to have a kid together, a human child.
Yes, an actually human one.
An actual human child, and you know what? He doesn't know anything about what is going on with her or anything like that. He just knows that she's shacked up with the psychiatrist, because she's part of some like program, what I mean, like when it comes to like a psychological evaluation, I guess, or whatever. But please, let's continue from there because it's pretty wild, including a really gnarly death in a school.
The takeaway from the film for me is not linear at all. Mm-hmm. Like it's a series of more and more horrifying images, which starts from the seemingly innocuous image of a woman being treated by a psychiatrist, and it just spirals. It just gets.
All right, so basically, let's get to the end, because I think that was, I think that's the one thing that people do remember from this movie, is that Nola is, in a position where, she's giving birth, you know what I mean, and
through her belly button.
Through her belly button, and like this is at a point where the daughter is kidnapped, and the father is trying to get into this retreat to get her back. And not get, completely torn asunder by these, rage children.
Mutant children, rage
right.
Babies. Rage babies!
So the funny thing is like, the psychiatrist is supposed to, like, keep her at bay. Because, like, if he can actually, like, put her emotions in a positive light, you know what I mean? That, nothing will happen and he'll be able to go up and get his kid and get her out. So she gives birth and starts licking the child. And the psychiatrist goes, ugh! Like that, and it pisses her off.
Yeah, the psychiatrist is doomed, by the way.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, because the psychiatrist couldn't keep his cool, that she was actually like licking a child like a cat, and he goes ugh, and then like all hell breaks loose.
Yeah. Well, it is a really interesting study of how emotions affect like your outer world.
Yeah.
Or because people say like, oh, it's this big like metaphysical thing, like, oh, the more angry you are in life, like you manifest the anger, but it's
well, just that seed alone, it would be like if somebody just, like told you to your face you're disgusting or something. Like, you're obviously going to get angry from that. You know what I mean?
Well, but the anger, what I'm saying is like the anger here is like it physically manifests into things that will kill you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is it's revolutionary, I think.
And when it comes to freaks and mutants, I think it's important to talk about certain films that have legacies attached to them. And this is a film that has 2 prequels, 2 sequels, and 1 standalone film, and a remake that was supposed to come out this year, but didn't due to COVID. So we haven't seen any trailer or anything. I think there was a poster that came out. I think that was it, like a teaser poster or whatever. Of course, I'm talking about Wrong Turn. It's such an important film, when it comes to, the freaks and mutant genre. And, the first one that came out, pretty simple premise. There's a medical student played by Desmond Harrington. If you guys aren't familiar, he was in Ghost Ship. He actually turned out to be the antagonist in Ghost Ship. Great actor. I wish he was in more stuff. Elijah Dushku from Buffy the Vampire Slayer was in it also. That was like, one of her, like main starring vehicles. And it's just basically this guy who like gets caught up with these kids that are camping. There's a roadblock in area of West Virginia. He ends up taking a shortcut, and his tire gets popped. And of course, like they're just trying to figure out, like where the damage to these vehicles came from and whatnot. And it's your typical cannibalistic family that's murdering people and eating them, and taking their vehicles and like stealing them and hiding them and shit like that. You know what I mean? But it was just so well done, I thought. Really great action set pieces. Of course, when they end up in a ranger tower, and like the mutants on the bottom can't get to them and whatnot, and like literally have to burn the tower down to get to them and stuff. Like there's some really really good stuff in here. Really solid kills also. Really great solid effects as well when it came to the family. Especially there's one named Three Finger that actually ends up in the other sequels. Really great effects. My personal favorite, though, when it comes to the Wrong Turn series, and this is actually one of the most critically positive of the sequels, is Wrong Turn 2 Dead End, which was actually directed by Joe Lynch.
No shit. I love Joe Lynch.
Yeah, Joe Lynch directed the second one. So basically it just starts out, it's you have an American Idol contestant, a real life American Idol contestant. She ends up on on a wrong road. She supposedly hits somebody with her car. There's a great scene where she gets her lip bit off, and then Three Finger, one of the the main guys from the original, actually like slices her in half. It's pretty fucking fantastic. But the one thing I do love about this one was that it was basically a reality game show that she was trying to get to. She was a contestant on a reality game show, kind of like like Survivor or something like that. And it was actually run by a former military guy played by Henry Rollins. Fantastic fucking character too, by the way. Colonel Dale.
I love that man.
Oh, he's so good in this movie. It's one of his best roles. I mean, hands down. So it's basically like this reality game show that goes awry. And I think that the thing I like about this one is that I think some of the characters are definitely more likable, especially Erica Learson, who's part of the cast. Of course, she was in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and she's also in Blair Witch Book of Shadows too. Fantastic actress, and incidentally my sister, which is something that people said for years, like, oh my god, Erica Learson looks just like you. You could be siblings or whatever. But yeah, it's cool because the sequel actually kind of plays more into their origins and how they became the people that they are. And it turns out that it's through insane fucking amounts of inbreeding, obviously. There's actually a chemical that they were using at a paper mill that was located nearby, and the actual the toxic chemical was actually pouring into the water supply, or the river supply. You know what I mean? Where they're actually located. That's where the whole mutant thing came from. Was from a paper mill. And insane amounts of fucking your sister.
Yeah, I mean, that'll do it too.
But yeah, like I said, Henry Rollins is fantastic in this movie, and like I said, some really, like the first one, really good action, set pieces, and really, awesome gore. It just the first two for me are very, very enjoyable. I've never seen the rest personally. I don't know. I just never really had any interest. I know there's two prequels, that, really, really delve into the history of the family. And then there's two sequels that, are, further out, I guess in their timeline and stuff. But yeah, really important movie. I mean, any film, especially in that day, that's going to build its own legacy, just like, Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street or any of those films, from back in the day. I mean, that holds some merit, especially in our genre. Now, this one stars Barbara Crampton. and Jeffrey Combs and their blind daughter, Rebecca. What do you have to say about the original Castle Freak?
Oh, it's cheesy as hell, and I love it to death.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the dramatic beats are really over the top. With the whole wife and husband, like the husband who was drinking and supposedly and caused the accident that blinded their daughter.
Yeah.
And the wife that won't forgive him under any circumstances. Like all of that stuff is very.
It's kind of like a Lifetime movie before a Lifetime movie within.
It's very heavy-handed. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. But what's interesting about this movie that's so cheesy and stuff, like these people are acting their asses off in this movie.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. But I think what helps, temper that sort of over the top emotional Lifetime stuff is the uber violence, creepiness, weirdness. I mean, there's some moments in here in this film where you're just like,
it's pretty graphic stuff. There's a lot of people that there's a couple scenes, one of the most intense movies supposedly that ever came out in indie film is a series of films called August Underground, which is something Fred Vogel did. There's some really intense shit in this movie. When it comes to there's some sexual things, with the daughter, and of course this Castle Freak, who is actually a man named Giorgio Orsino, who is the child of a 12th century duchess in Italy. That's another thing that we should also mention too. The Castle Freak remake is actually in Armenia, and this is
Albania, yeah.
Albania, and this is in Italy.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a little bit of the history of this movie, because this is pretty wild. So this is a castle that Charles Band of Full Moon Productions fucking owned. He owned a castle. So that's insane. So all the movies that he put out, like all the, Puppet Masters and, Doll Man and all that shit, gave him enough money to buy a fucking castle, which Stuart Gordon actually directed the Pit and the Pendulum in initially before that. But this movie, basically Charles Band, according to the lore, Charles Band had a bunch of fake movie posters in his office, like films that he actually wanted to create. And Stuart Gordon walked in and he saw a castle and a freak on a poster. He said, "Wow, that looks fantastic. What's the idea there?" And Charles Band looked at him and said, "Well, there's a castle and there's a freak.
There's a freak.
You want to do it? Great, let's do it." So Stuart Gordon took nothing and made it out of something. And obviously, with these, Lovecraftian vibes that he likes to put in all his films and stuff, you know what I mean? Because he's a huge, dare I say, the best visual devotee of H.P. Lovecraft. I don't think there's any.
He gave in that one very, outsidery Lovecraftian moment of the mirror breaking, which is great,
Yeah, so Jeffrey Combs is a complete and utter, piece of shit drunk. And actually, this family's, getting ready to, move in. It's always funny to me when somebody moves into a castle, you know what I mean? Like, oh, we did it here, you know what I mean? And he's bringing prostitutes back to the castle. And then they end up getting dismembered along with the maid. And they're finally finding prostitutes. Of course, Jeffrey Combs' character, John, is, the main target for what the Italian, cops are, in terms of suspect, he's obviously the main suspect. And then it kind of pretty much by the end kind of rolls through your regular kind of reluctant hero situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, he gets arrested. John gets arrested and is stuck at the police station while his wife and daughter are at the castle. ready to, move out. But of course, this is when the freak decides to.
And what a fantastic design too, by the way, especially when the freak had bandages around his face and you could only see certain aspects of, his face through the bandages and stuff. Whew, such a good design. Such a good design. Yeah, so, like I said, there is the reluctant hero moment at the end where, John sacrifices himself, to save his family. And of course, Barbara Crampton instantly falls in love with him all over again. I've always loved you.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I understand now why you did what you did. But yeah, it's not grade A material by any means. But I do respect very much that, we've talked to so, me personally, and of course, you yourself, we've talked to so many actors in our career and stuff. And there's certain people that really just loathe the fact that they ever had to do a horror film, if they ever had to do one. You know what I mean? And then you have the other set, which is a very small set, that not only respect that they had to do horror. I mean, this is something you got to remember. Barbara Crampton was doing soap operas around the time that she was doing movies like Castle Freak. She had a career. You know what I mean? And actually, when she was doing stuff like As the World Turns and stuff, somebody would call her up and like, hey, you want to be in this freak movie? Or is that yeah, it's work. It's great. Let's do it. And she really has a deep and utter love for not only this story that she did, that is, basically like, really violent B-grade cheese. She's just, very passionate about the genre and the fans itself. She's really honestly like an ambassador of this genre. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. She never apologizes for the film she made in the in the 80s. It's not a matter of, oh God, I just did that back then. Like she owns all of it, and she keeps making great movies too, which is yeah, she's a powerhouse.
Yeah, for sure.
Barbara Crampton is awesome.
Which I guess, we should mention, our final episode of the Dungeon of Deadly Delights podcast will be devoted to Miss Barbara Crampton, who will be coming to talk to us about her career. Some projects that she's got coming up, like Jacob's Wife is a film she has coming out in 2021. She is probably one of the hardest, if not the hardest working women in entertainment and this genre for sure. She's constantly working. So we are so graced with her presence that she's actually going to be able to do this. I mean, she's always working constantly.
Yeah.
I think this is a great episode. Let us know, what your favorite freaking mutant movie is in the comments. We'd love to hear it. We want to do actually more interaction with our, with our people that watch the show and stuff. And, obviously there's going to be some changes in 2021 when it comes to the look of the show and, all that stuff. We're actually like in talks on all of that stuff.
Forward.
But you know what? This has been an absolute nightmare of a fucking year.
Good riddance 2020.
This has been an absolute fucking nightmare of a year. But I will say this. I might get a little sappy here. I'm sorry. I have to. This experience working with Holly, even during COVID, has just been so therapeutic for me. Putting these shows together, being able to have these conversations, showing our passion for horror and all of that stuff has really gotten me through this. And I just, I really hope for everybody that it is an absolutely better year, of course, for everyone, when it comes to finances, when it comes to, health and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I know that, not to get, too, into the political sense of things, but I know that it's going to be a difficult 4 years. And even though, it feels like there's a turning point and that fuck is finally going to be out of office, it's going to be a rough road to turn this country around after all the damage that he's done. And I think that's why a lot of us are in the dire straits that we're in right now, is because of this man and what he did to this country. And it's going to be a hard thing to pull ourselves out of. But entertainment is important, and I hope that we've done something for you guys, when it comes to being able to allowing you to, technically, like, or metaphorically, let your hair down for a second and, take a breather, talk about things that you love and, that you're passionate about. We love doing it. And, like, we've got a great new year set up, for more horror talk, when it comes to the podcast and the show and everything. And I just want to thank you all personally for all the love and continued support, when it comes to me and Holly. I mean, Holly and I went from literally like 100 viewers a clip when we first started working together to over 1,000 every single time that we do an episode. And it just keeps growing. So thank you so much for your continued love and support, man. We really fucking appreciate it. Have a wonderful Christmas. I am a deep lover of Christmas. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Yeah, and we'll see you in January when we talk about the best of 2020. And that's it for us. We'll scare you later. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Cheers.